Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a life today. Well, not just any life, the life of Meriwether Lewis.
Oh, an excellent choice for a deep dive.
Yeah. We're going to be going, beyond that typical explorer image we all have. And we've got some great material to work with from the American History Tellers podcast, specifically their episode with historian Clay Jensen.
Ah, yes, Jenkinson. He always brings a fresh perspective to these historical figures.
For sure. And you know what's really interesting about this deep dive? We're going to uncover a darker side to Lewis's story as well, particularly his mysterious death just a few years after the expedition.
Right. It's one of those enduring historical mysteries. How could this national hero, a man who achieved so much, meet such a tragic end? It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's almost like a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
To solve it, we've got to look beyond the heroic image and try to understand, the real person.
Absolutely.
So who was Meriwether Lewis?
Yeah.
And I mean, not just the explorer, but the person, the man behind the legend.
Well, Jenkinson paints a picture that's much more nuanced than what you usually find in textbooks. He uses terms like brilliant but erratic, high-strung, deeply self-critical. I mean, not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think of a fearless explorer, right?
It's so interesting how these deep dives always seem to bring out these contradictions. I mean, he was chosen to lead this incredible expedition. He had to have been so capable. But at the same time, you said he was full of self-doubt.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how that impacted him.
Well, it's a good reminder, I think, that accomplishments don't always erase, those inner struggles. And to really understand Lewis's journey, we have to go back further to his early life.
Oh, yeah?
His connection to Thomas Jefferson. That's crucial here.
Ah, yes. The famous duo. Didn't Lewis grow up near Monticello?
He did. Practically in Jefferson's backyard. And later he even served as Jefferson's private secretary at the White House.
Wow.
So, they were close. They shared a lot of ideals. And Jefferson's vision of westward expansion must have been a frequent topic of conversation.
Oh, I bet. I mean, that ultimately led to the Louisiana Purchase, right?
Absolutely. And here's a fascinating thing to consider. Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, he was what they called a strict constructionist, meaning he believed in really adhering closely to the Constitution. And the Constitution didn't really say anything about a president buying massive chunks of land from foreign powers.
So what did he do? I mean, the Louisiana Purchase was massive. It changed everything for America.
Well, according to Jenkinson, Jefferson was really torn. But in the end, pragmatism won out.
I guess so. It all worked out.
And there's even a story about James Madison, basically telling Jefferson, just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah. When Jefferson was kind of wringing his hands about whether it was constitutional or not.
Wow. I mean, that's not exactly the legal advice you'd expect.
Right.
With a decision that big. But I guess it worked out.
It did. It just goes to show even founding fathers can face unexpected dilemmas. And once the Louisiana Purchase was finalized, westward expansion became, well, it was like an obsession for Jefferson.
Right.
This vast unknown territory became his mission to explore, to map out. And Lewis, with his adventurous spirit, his deep understanding of the wilderness, he was the perfect choice to lead the way.
And thank goodness for the Lewis and Clark journals. Imagine going on a journey like that and not documenting everything.
I know, right? Those journals are an absolute goldmine for historians.
Yeah.
Such a vivid account, day by day, of the expedition.
Oh, yeah. They're amazing. But isn't there something peculiar about Lewis's entries?
There is. His entries are missing.
Really?
For more than half the journey. It's a mystery that's baffled historians forever.
What? More than half?
Yeah.
So what happened? Did he stop writing? Were the pages lost or something?
Well, no one knows for sure. It's possible they were damaged during the journey. Sudden storms, river crossings, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. They didn't have all the fancy gear we have today.
Exactly. But some historians think Lewis might have intentionally destroyed some of his writings. Maybe for privacy, or even because he was starting to, have second thoughts about the expedition and its impact.
That's definitely possible. I mean, if he was having doubts about westward expansion and all the consequences, maybe he didn't want to put those feelings down on paper.
And don't forget, Lewis was very aware of the potential consequences for the Native American tribes. He saw firsthand their complex cultures and traditions, and, even though he approached those encounters diplomatically, he must have known their arrival would change everything.
Oh, absolutely. It adds a whole other dimension to this, doesn't it? Trying to explore and document this new territory, while also being aware that his actions could lead to, well, displacement and conflict.
Right.
It's a lot to carry.
It is, and it shows up in his writings, even in the entries we do have.
I was going to ask about that, actually. You mentioned earlier that Lewis's writing style was quite different from Clark's.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, Clark was very meticulous and detail-oriented, almost like, a scientist recording data.
I can see that.
But Lewis, he was more introspective, more lyrical. His entries often go into, like, his personal reflections, his anxieties, even his awe at the natural world. It's fascinating.
That's really interesting. This blend of like scientific observation and deep contemplation, it's amazing. It makes me wish we had even more of his writing.
I know.
But I guess, in a way, those missing entries just add to the mystery.
Absolutely. They leave us with more questions than answers.
Speaking of which, I've always been amazed by the amount of stuff they took with them. Weren't they carrying, like, thousands of pounds of supplies?
Oh, yeah, over 60,000 pounds.
60,000.
And it wasn't all just maps and compasses either.
Oh, what else?
A significant portion of that load, nearly a third, was dedicated to gifts for Native American tribes.
Gifts? What kind of gifts?
All sorts of things. Tools, clothing. They even had these things called sovereignty tokens, which were basically peace medals with Jefferson's likeness and these certificates of good behavior.
Certificates of good behavior. That sounds a bit, well, patronizing.
It does reflect the power dynamics at play.
Yeah.
The gifts were meant to impress the tribes, to establish American dominance and encourage them to become reliant on American goods.
So it was all part of a larger strategy.
Exact.
To, well, shape the West and America's image.
Precisely. And while some gifts were practical, others were almost comical in retrospect. Like, they gave a corn mill to the Mandan tribe.
A corn mill?
The Mandan were already expert farmers.
Oh, right. Famous for it.
Exactly. They had no need for this big European-style mill.
Oh, I see. Like giving someone a fancy new gadget when they're perfectly happy with their old one.
That's a great analogy. And it really highlights that cultural disconnect, between the explorers and the Native Americans.
I wonder what those interactions were really like. I mean, on the one hand, Lewis and Clark were trying to establish peaceful relations. But on the other, they were representing a nation that would ultimately displace these tribes.
It's a complicated legacy.
It really is.
And it brings us back to that central question. Why did Lewis, after achieving so much, ultimately take his own life?
It's a tough one. But maybe by understanding his journey, his personality, the whole context of the expedition, we can start to put the pieces together.
I think you're right.
And maybe those missing journal entries hold some clues, too.
They might. Who knows what we could learn if those pages ever resurface?
I guess we'll have to see. But for now, let's dive into what we do know about Lewis's life and try to make sense of his tragic end.
Sounds like a plan. It's a puzzle for sure. And those missing journal entries, they might hold some answers. I mean, what was Lewis thinking during those undocumented months? Was he having doubts, maybe wrestling with the whole ethical side of the expedition? Or was there even something he felt he just couldn't write down?
It is kind of tantalizing, isn't it, to think about what we might find in those lost pages. Have historians come up with any theories about why they're missing?
Oh, there are a few. Some think, maybe they were just lost. Damage during the trip, a sudden storm, a river crossing gone wrong. It wouldn't have been hard to lose a journal under those conditions.
I guess not. I mean, they weren't exactly traveling with waterproof backpacks and Ziploc bags.
Right. Others think maybe Lewis destroyed them himself. Maybe for privacy or, maybe even because he was starting to have second thoughts about the whole thing, the impact of the expedition,
Oh, that's interesting. If he was starting to question westward expansion and all the consequences that came with it, maybe he didn't want to document those feelings.
Yeah, it's possible. And remember, he was acutely aware of the potential consequences for the Native American tribes. He saw their cultures, their traditions firsthand. And while he was, diplomatic in those interactions, he must have known things would never be the same after they arrived.
Right. He was exploring and documenting this vast new territory, but also aware that his actions could lead to displacement and conflict.
Yeah, a heavy burden to carry for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that it would show up in his writing.
It does, even in the entries we have.
I wanted to ask about that. You mentioned before that Lewis and Clark had very different writing styles. What made Lewis's so unique?
Well, Clark was meticulous, super detail-oriented, like a scientist recording observations,
Right.
But Lewis, he was more introspective, more lyrical, you could even say. His entries, they often delve into his personal feelings, anxieties, even his awe at nature. It's almost like reading a philosopher's diary.
I love that. Scientific observation and deep contemplation. It's so fascinating. Makes me wish even more that we had access to all of his writings.
I know.
I guess we'll just have to keep hoping that those missing pages turn up one day. But for now, the mystery remains.
It does. A mystery, but also a reminder that history, well, it's not always neat and tidy, right?
Speaking of which, I've always been blown away by how much stuff they took on that expedition. Wasn't it something like thousands of pounds of supplies?
Oh, yeah, over 60,000 pounds to be exact.
60,000. That's
Oh.
incredible.
And they didn't just pack maps and compasses, you know. They were diplomats, scientists, cartographers. They were even cultural ambassadors in a way.
Right. It was like a traveling roadshow for the U.S. government.
Exactly. And they were facing all these challenges, treacherous terrain, crazy weather, encounters with wildlife. I mean, it must have been exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time.
It's the kind of story that really captures the imagination, isn't it?
Yeah.
Coming face to face with the grizzly bear, navigating raging rapids, or trying to survive a brutal winter in the wilderness.
Absolutely. It's a testament to human resilience and our drive to explore.
And in a way, that's part of the lasting legacy of Lewis and Clark, right? It's not just about what they discovered or mapped out. It's about pushing boundaries.
Right. It's about the power of human ingenuity and determination.
Like that saying, it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Exactly. And their journey, well, it was one that would change the course of American history, but it did have a darker side.
You're right. We've talked about the impact on Native American tribes.
Yeah.
But there was also the toll it took on Lewis himself. Jenkinson mentions this interesting idea, the Buzz Aldrin syndrome.
Yeah. It refers to the challenges that some astronauts face, especially the first ones to walk on the moon, you know, trying to adjust back to normal life on Earth after such an extraordinary experience.
I can't even imagine how difficult that transition must be, going from the ultimate adventure back to the everyday routine. And in Lewis's case, he also had the pressure of writing about the experience, of living up to the expectations of, well, a nation that saw him as a hero.
Yeah, trying to translate the grandeur of the West into words, while also dealing with, you know, the emotional and psychological effects of the journey. It must have felt impossible.
It puts his later struggles into perspective. Depression, disillusionment, it's all the more understandable when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like he reached this pinnacle of achievement only to find himself lost in the aftermath.
It's a sobering thought. What if Lewis had lived to publish his complete account? I mean, how would we view him? How would we view the expedition itself if we had those missing pieces?
It's a question worth pondering.
It really is. It makes you think, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, would we see him differently knowing what he went through? Would we still see him as a hero?
It's hard to say, you know. But maybe even more so. I mean, if we had those journals, all those thoughts and observations, you know, we might have a much deeper understanding of the expedition's impact, both on Lewis and on the country as a whole.
And I wonder about his perspective on westward expansion, too. Would it be different than what we usually read about?
You know, it's possible. Remember how introspective he was, how sensitive he was to the complexities of everything around him. He wasn't just about claiming territory. He was interacting with those native cultures, observing nature, and really thinking about the ethical dilemmas of it all.
It's what makes those missing entries so intriguing, you know? They're like a gap in our knowledge, a missing puzzle piece that could totally change how we understand him and his legacy.
A story with missing chapters. An unfinished symphony.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think, what if? What if he had lived to share his story? What if he'd been able to process everything and find some peace after the expedition?
It's a good question.
Maybe his writing could have helped bridge those cultural divides. You know, a way to build understanding when it was so desperately needed.
It's possible. Or maybe his journals would have challenged the whole narrative of westward expansion, you know, revealing the human cost and those complex relationships that shaped the West.
It's a good reminder, isn't it, that history is so much more than just dates and battles. It's about people, the choices they made.
And sometimes those stories, well, they stay incomplete.
Right. And we're left with the mysteries, the unanswered questions.
But it's also a reminder that history, well, it's not static. It's always evolving, being reinterpreted as we get new perspectives, you know? Who knows? Maybe someday those missing journals will turn up and shed new light on everything.
Wouldn't that be incredible? Even in this digital age, with information everywhere, There are still mysteries out there waiting to be solved.
For sure.
And stories waiting to be told. Maybe Lewis's complete narrative is out there somewhere.
Maybe it is.
Until then, we have to, piece together what we do have. His triumphs and struggles, the brilliance, the flaws.
Exactly.
And that's what makes him so compelling, I think. He wasn't just some hero figure. He was human. Dealing with these extraordinary circumstances, the weight of history on his shoulders.
Absolutely.
And in the end, that's what makes history so relatable, right? It's about real people. Their hopes and dreams, their victories and defeats.
It's true. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Meriwether Lewis, I hope it's left you with a sense of wonder,
Yeah. And that desire to keep exploring, to keep asking those questions, to seek out different perspectives.
For sure. Never stop learning, right?
Never. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring and keep seeking out those untold stories.
And we'll see you then.